Welcome back. And now the issue of land, or the conversation on land in this country, tends to be a very emotive one. And this morning we want to have that conversation on the proposed land reforms. And in studio we are joined by Mr. Odenda Lumumba. He's the CEO of Kenya Land Alliance, Dr. Timothy Njagi of the Tegemeo Institute, and Mwenda Makathimo. He's a land expert. Together with Mutegi Njau, that's the discussion they'll be having this morning. And just a quick reminder, I want to get in touch with us. 22422 is the SMS line. Any question, comments, suggestions that you may be having for the panel, please send in those SMSs. 22422 is the SMS line. For now, I hand you back to Mutegi. Mutegi.
Good morning, gentlemen. Land reform is a very contentious issue. In fact, land issues from independence have been major. Some of the bills that are pending to be passed, which the Parliament is asking for postponement, involve land. What's the main problem? I mean, from all of it, what's the main issue?
I think I could say, Bwana Mutegi, that our land reforms are already enacted. They're enacted in two ways. They're enacted through the National Land Policy, which was passed by the Parliament. They're enacted through the Constitution. So what we need to do, as far as Kenyan land reform is concerned, is already known by the blueprints that we have. Further still, we have tried to operationalize some of that by the initial legislations, the Land Act, the Land Registration Act, and the Environment Land Court, and eventually the National Land Commission Act. But we also have to accept one thing, that the kind of reform we are having in Kenya, they are market-driven. And to the extent that the market is the one which is supposed to sort out. And what is the land reform? Land reform, in my view, is basically about redistribution of land. Because as populations grow, those who had land in the initial are very few people, because our population has been growing. Colonialists found us when we were hardly 2 million. By independence, we are between 7 and 9 million. To date, we are 40 million. So the question is, how do we organize that space to deliver? And that has led to a number of things that are really troubling Kenyans to sort out. But they're already determined, because we have to do that. One of them is prescribing the minimum and maximum land holding a private person could hold. The other is also revisiting historical land injustices in this country. The other is trying to provide for recognition, protection, and eventual registration of community land. And therefore, in a sense, we have a number of important constitutional directives that we need to operationalize. And that is the question now of debate, is of how. The contention further is about the process, because the process you engage with will determine what results you get. And I'm sorry to say that the manner in which the formulation of the laws has been carried is not up to the direction of the Constitution. You could see in those bills, they say, these are the guiding guidelines. One of them is always about participation, emanating from Article 10 of the Constitution. It's about land policy principles. It's about Article 60, land policy principles. But in practice, Kenyans are not participating fully as stakeholders in the due process of implementing the laws.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mutegi. The need for land reform arises from the land questions that have been cited before. One of the land questions that was cited was, first of all, there were too many land laws in the past regime, and all those land laws were over 60. And they were almost confusing, contradicting, and citizens' rights were not clear. The second was about productivity. How do we use our land productively to support the growing population? Because land's productivity was deteriorating, the quality of land. There was a lot of erosion. Sometimes you find urban planning has not been there, so that development has not been happening in a coordinated manner. The other problem was corruption in the institutions. And a lot of bureaucracy, centralized bureaucracy, where officers turned themselves into rent-seeking objects, so that people would not get services. You would have to corrupt people to get services. The other bit was conflicts over land, such that communities were conflicting, individuals were conflicting. The other problem was land grab, where the power elite was grabbing land from people without power, and there was land was being used as a political tool for gaining political power. You remember forests were being destroyed and environment everywhere, people grabbing forests, people grabbing rivers, even cemeteries. And also, Mr. Mutegi, you notice that from our history there has been displacements and land rights being taken away from people, either because they belong to a certain ethnic group, or because they belong to a certain class, or because somebody just doesn't like them. So those were the social contexts and political and economic contexts within which land reforms were being sought. So seeking social harmony, seeking political harmony, seeking economic prosperity in a manner that is balanced, that is what we call sustainable development.
Mr. Timothy Njagi, are we getting anywhere?
I think we've come from far, Mr. Mutegi, and I would like to give you a different context from the ones that my colleagues have given. Yes. So we are at Richards Institute, and we especially look at agricultural development and agricultural and rural development. So if you look at land, for example, is the main factor of production when it comes to agriculture. But in, for example, our data, which is national representative, shows that in 2010, majority of the farmers, which are smallholders, they had an average of 5 acres in terms of land holding. And out of these 5 acres, they had put 3 acres under cultivation. This year, we are talking about an average of 3 acres. It is coming down, and what is being put under cultivation is only 1.5 acres. So when you look at agricultural productivity, as you just mentioned, then what are we talking about? The livelihoods of these farmers. On the other hand, if you look at the community land, where we have majority of the people are pastoralists, we are seeing a wave. For example, if you look at the Maasai land, recently, just look at our neighbors, which is Kajiado, Narok, you'll find that most of those places are being privatized. The indigenous people living in these areas are still doing pastoralism. So we are changing the land, we are fragmenting land, but in terms of land usage, it still remains the same. And what happens is that you'll find that the Maasais, the indigenous Maasais, are being pushed now into Tsavo. Yeah, because if you look at the migratory corridors, most of the community lands are near those corridors. So because one of the reasons they're being pushed there is because the grazing lands is declining, and they have not changed. They're not being urbanized. So we are urbanizing the areas where they're staying, but their ways of life is not still urbanized. So you'll find that whether you're in a rich agricultural land, where we talk about the high potential rain areas, you're having a challenge in terms of the land sizes are declining to the extent that it's no longer profitable for you to continue to be a farmer. If you only have 1.5 acres, and currently we are talking about for example, if you talk about maize, which is the most commonly grown crop amongst all regions, we are talking about an average yield of around 1.7 tons per hectare. So if you have 1.5 per hectare, then what livelihoods can you support on that piece of land? So those are some of the challenges that necessitates us and makes us to want to pass this land. And it is important, as Mr. Odenda mentioned, that people participate so that they understand where we are coming from and where we are heading to.
A former minister for land, I think, Kamunya, trying to make regulations about limit.
Yes.
It was very heated. It didn't work. Can it work?
I think from our perspective, we think that looking at the historical challenges that we've had when it comes to land, I think the spirit of the Constitution when we were passing, or when we wanted to enact these bills, was that one, we wanted to have a society where we didn't have a few landlords and the rest of us being squatters. So I think that's kind of caps the maximum. On the other hand, we also want to have a scenario whereby if I'm a farmer, I'm given enough resources or I'm allowed to access enough resources that will allow me to continue being an efficient farmer. Currently, the government supports farmers in the sense of providing subsidies, but this is not sustainable. We cannot keep giving subsidies year in, year out. We need to have a system in place that allows farmers to be competitive. One of the ways that we can do that,
Mr. Mutegi, you know, when you look at land, from a land economics point of view, land is a derived, the demand for land is derived. It is derived from needs of human beings. And the needs determine the land uses that you take. You either need housing, you need agriculture, you need schools, you need hospitals, you need roads, you need all those things. So we cannot look at land management only in terms of, say, agriculture. We must look at it in a holistic context. So when you talk minimum and maximum, you have to ask yourself maximum for what, on what basis. And if you talk agriculture, it is also not uniform. Agriculture, there is urban agriculture, there is rural agriculture, there are different crops, there are different soil types, there are different ecological zones. So it has to be informed from a development point of the country. Where is the country? What does the population need? So then that informs whatever ratios we put. For instance, within towns, there has been plot ratios all over. This matter of maximum and minimum has been practiced in planning for a long time. But it is not haphazard. It cannot be fixed in statutory legislation, because planning is dynamic and it has to be informed by some parameters, some variables that has a human developmental context. And the issue we have here is not even about landlords and not having landlords. Is the issue of where does the country's socio, political, economic setting put us in terms of the resource land. That is what has to be, an expertise has to be informed by that.
Okay. Yeah. I think I need to come in here. One, the validity of fixing minimum and maximum is a constitutional directive. It's a people's will. Kenyans express themselves towards it. What is very key is not
minimum and maximum agricultural land.
No.
Or any land.
The land holding to a private person, whether it's agriculture, whether it's urban use for plots, whatever use you want to put to, whether it's forestry, whether conservation, is uniform. The limit was only to the private holding, but the uses is multiple. So the issue, what is at stake, is to say, you started by hinting Kimunya tried this, and it didn't work. The issue was that the minister then did not consult people. Similarly, we have had a bill which purported to fix minimums and maximums in different ecological zones without participation of persons. Even if it was, at the end of the day, the bottom line about fixing minimum, what we call land ceilings, is basically country specific in terms of context, but you are basically addressing issues of food security, issues of employment, issues of landlessness. You are fixing issues of planning broadly. So every time you are dealing with this, you need all stakeholders to be on table. As it is always commonly said, if you are not on the table, seated, eating, you must be part of the menu. You are being eaten. So if anybody purports to be dealing with these minimums and maximum, either philosophically without involving people, is getting it wrong. That is one of the reasons.
What do you mean by involving people?
Involving people means you carry out a scientific study where you carry out the sample size within different ecological zones. And remember that those ecological zones, apart from being humid, humid, arid, semi-arid and whatever, that is also being impacted on by climate change. So you have to go out there and get the findings.
Well, Mr. Mutegi, ecological zones is one factor. I do agree with my colleague Lumumba, but in the modern day time, beyond ecology, there is technology. There are changing lifestyle. There are emerging new land uses that require extra new parameters. For instance, if you're dealing with telecommunication, what is the minimum size of land you need for a telecommunication mast? Yeah? It is beyond an ecological point. It's about radio signals. If you're dealing with mining, What are you dealing with here? What economic and social consequences are you dealing with here? If you're dealing with urbanization, like the resort city, say in Isiolo, what are you dealing with here? You're dealing with a whole change of lifestyle for communities. So these communities who are pastoralists now, because maybe they need this rangeland that is this size, but beyond that, when you touch their lifestyles and change them completely, what will you support them with in terms of socio-economic sustainability? You know, it is beyond technician fixing. It has to be informed by real life realities. We are dealing with human life here. We are not dealing with machines.
I think Mutegi, there's something here to say. That's why we say the directive, even within the law, the Land Act are directed to have a scientific commission to deal with these things. Just like we said, if you go in a rangeland and the kind of land uses you're introducing has nothing to do with what those in the rangeland are doing. Rangelands are basically used majority of times by pastoralism. They are used for conservation purposes in terms of wildlife. If you go in there and you're turning that into real estate, it has nothing to do with the lives of the people you found there. And definitely one wants to ask, what are the consequences? Because you might be pretending to be transforming an area, but you are basically dealing with a different...
What do you mean by pretending? Say, for example, Turkana. These people, they are pastoralists.
Yes.
We have oil there. You are saying that oil should stay underground there, because if you touch the oil, you will touch the pastoralists.
No, it's not that as if you touch the oil. The oil you touch, but the oil must transform the lives of the Turkanas. They must know, you can't have your cake, eat it and have it. So if the Turkana has to go to the position of drilling oil, they are losing that space to drilling of oil. And therefore it cannot be used at the same time for pastoralism. So you are basically transforming their lives. So their lives are going to change. You see, you cannot come today and you expect, for example, let me give you a quick example, living in Turkana. You come to Kiambu, and Kiambu with its proximity to Nairobi is dealing with real estates. You cannot keep on saying you have a small thing, you are growing your potatoes and vegetables. The issue is that you are using this land is changing, and the lives of those people, they are now going to earn their incomes from a different lifestyle. So the essence of all these things that you must learn to know what are the impacts and the consequences of this. The direction which we are dealing here, the directive is constitutional. The coming to achieve that is a due process in which all of us need to participate. Anybody trying to fix these things mechanically from a boardroom, you never get it right.
I think
so just to contribute to this, I think one, we must appreciate the complexity of fixing both the minimum and land size. As he mentioned, if you look at, for example, farming, we don't have monocrops unless for the large scale farmers. Most of the small scale farmers are mixed farming. They practice mixed farming. So you'll have livestock, you'll have crops, you have cash crops, food crops, and all of that mixed together in a small parcel of land. It is the duty of the government to ensure, as Mr. Lumumba mentioned, that, for example, that one of the key objectives is food security. So if you look at the neighboring like Kiambu, we know that most Kiambu has been agricultural land that is now being turned to real estate, rightly because of the demand for housing. But then the key thing is we need to strike a balance. So we cannot just say that there is demand for this kind of land, for this kind of use. Let's change to that because this is what people want.
But who has forced Kiambu to turn their coffee into real estate?
Economics.
Is it government?
No, I think at one point, yes, at one point the governor tried to say that he would not allow conversion of agricultural land.
Even Kajiado, they have said now you can't buy the land there now.
Yes, but then it will not work because one, people are looking at returns to land. So if I'm a farmer and I can make as much money as I would make by selling land to a person who is going to develop real estate, then I'm indifferent between the two. But then of course, if you look at the current economics, you'll find that of course if you sell the land you'll get a lot of millions, while if you just continue doing agriculture, unless you're a modern agriculture doing like very good horticulture and you can sell vegetables from Nairobi, if you're just the ordinary farmer, you will be making much less money, and there's a lot of incentive for you to sell. So the key thing is that we need to strike a balance so that one, we don't divert from our goals, because as we are saying,
we need also to provide food for the growing population. We need to provide these services. We need to provide roads. We need to provide for future investments. Even as, like my colleague mentioned, if you look at the resort city, with the resort city going into Isiolo, for example, it's going to have some effect on the pastoralist communities in Isiolo. But then the key thing is, does this effect make them better or does it make it worse? And then in terms of land use, does it disrupt how they utilize their land?
It must.
Yes, and then...
Mutegi, I think what we need to get into here is not to delve into the technical mechanics here, because that is properly directed in policy. That is properly directed in the Constitution, how the mechanics and the views of the people ought to be taken, and the participation and how the processes ought to be directed. The million-dollar question today, as we sit here, is, with all these policy proclamations, with all these directives that we have got, we have set for ourselves and targets, what is the implementing arms doing? What is the legislative arm doing? For instance, what we are bedeviling here about maximum, minimum and all this is a planning problem. What is the framework for planning coming up to? Where is the national land use planning policy that we talked about? Where is the spatial plans? What is guiding the counties in doing the plans for the lands within their jurisdiction as directed by the Constitution? Now we have this physical planning bill that is before Parliament. Yeah, is it following that directive? Are the institutions going to work to deliver that to the citizen? We have the questions of community rights that you've heard are being threatened by oil and all these things. Are the frameworks before Parliament going to resolve that? Are the institutions that are already formed serving that purpose? There has been a constitutional guarantee of security of land rights, yeah, in Article 60 of the Constitution. How come some people right now in other communities, you will go and get people who have no title deeds, people who wanted communal land cannot be registered communally, those who have it individually, adjudication schemes have not been resolved. What we are facing now are institutions fighting for power between the ministry, between the NLC, between the governors. This is what we need to be addressing to unlock, because the problem is clear and the direction of policy where we ought to be going is also clear.
What do you say about these advertisements from the Council of Governors about the Omnibus Land Amendment Bill 2015, Physical Planning Bill 2015, and the Community Land Bill 2015, developed by the Minister of Lands? They're very annoyed about.
Well, Mr. Mutegi, I saw the notice from the Council of Governors.
Yes.
That notice, first of all, is a bit fallacious, because it has some assumptions that are not informed by what has been happening. First of all, there is constitutional direction as to who ought to do what. Yeah? There is need for a community land law that will guarantee the rights of communities and that guarantees their registration. And the Constitution also guarantees them participation in management of their resources. Now, what we need to be asking is, what are the two processes? There are two processes now. There's one in Senate. There's a bill in Senate that is going to third reading. There's another one in National Assembly that has gone to, that is going for second reading. Now, looking at the two bills, there is a distinct disconnect. One has institutions that have community participation in management of resources. The other one doesn't have. The one of National Assembly doesn't have. And what I think is, we need to make sure that what is guaranteed to citizens from the Constitution is never taken away by anyone. But that law is very important because it covers 67% of this land. And that land is not for management by governors or counties. It is communities and the national framework for enabling. So governors trying to manage that land is misinformed.
So, Bwana Mutegi, there's something to correct about some of these things. The statement of the governors is reactive. It ought to have been proactive. They should not have waited for things to roll out and they just come and react. Even when they react, the way they are putting it, you can guess they have not read the bills. I think the issue of contention, if you came to, for example, start with the community land, the county governments have always behaved as if that is their own asset. And yet, this is clearly an asset of the communities, only vested in them and the community before it is registered. The issue about the community land bill that is contentious is that the management function, when you read the institutional framework, is being ceded to the cabinet secretary in charge of lands. That is not what is intended. The community ought to manage their land with the due regulatory framework direction. When you come to the omnibus bill, they are contending, it is amending already 3 existing land laws: the Land Act, the Land Acquisition Act, and the National Land Commission Act. In all those amendments, the sense was, initially when the discussion started, was to overcome contradictions, inconsistencies in those laws. But what is now coming major is that all the powers that were to the National Land Commission is being ceded to the Cabinet Secretary. Actually, in much of it says change where it reads commission, replace with the Cabinet Secretary. Delete this, delete that. But all that said and done, I think further still to that, I think the concern is that are we having the national executive, which used to be with the presidents and the principal agent of that president, which was the commissioner, are we having that situation being reversed to have the cabinet secretary who is going to hold the agents for the presidents? Is that what we are seeing? I think that needs to be debated. But I think I need to go back and say this at what my colleague has said, Mwenda. I think it is also very, very important that something must be really in the air. How on earth are we having the same government gazetting 2 bills at the same time they are running? The one he has mentioned. Actually, there are supposed to be 3. 2013, there was a gazette bill on the community land. In 2014, there was one. 2015, there's another. On earth, somebody is really messing up. And all those bills, they have a level of variance. That level of variance is a major concern. Very finally, my take is that when you read even the minimum and the maximum, we had a draft that was being already discussed. It had reached the committee of the parliament. In the omnibus bill, which is yet to be gazetted, we have now provisions which are basically a miniature of that bill, because out of hue and cry, they have tried to reverse it. What have they done? All the powers to make rules and regulation, cabinet secretary. All the exemptions to who will have beyond the maximum, cabinet secretary. Even the study, which is supposed to establish those minimum, is now talked in terms of the review going forward, not as an initiation of fixing those minimums.
Yeah, Mr. Mutegi, now is when we are addressing the subject. The subject is in terms of process of lawmaking and in terms of the content of the bills, so that the outcomes are realized. Now, I've seen the Council of Governors say there is no need for an omnibus bill amending the land laws. They are very wrong on that. First of all, the amendments must seek to remove the conflict that has been bedeviling the ministry, the National Land Commission, because literally for the last 2 years we have been paying public officers, giving them money, both in the commission and the ministry, and no work has been going on. Citizens have just been treated to sycophancy, or to just dances. We are giving you title deeds, we are making a national land information system, we will be resolving your historical injustices, but nothing is happening. We have just been seeing power fight. Why? The land laws of 2012, the Land Act, Land Registration Act, created a major conflict. They gave powers of registration to the commission, yet they also gave powers of regulation and powers of appointing the registrar to the Public Service Commission and being controlled by the ministry. So setting them to fight. They gave powers of adjudication partly to the commission, yet the Adjudication Act remained intact with the minister having those powers. That's why we need that bill to sort them out. They are taking each other to court. They have taken each other to court. Why? Because the parliament did not legislate those laws. People are still waiting for title deeds. They are not getting. People are waiting for services. They go to registries, they are told go to commission, the registrar is not there. Now, let's come to the questions of the institutions that manage land. When they write these bills that they have been writing, they were all writing about themselves. Commission saying we'll turn ourselves into a tribunal so that that tribunal now becomes secondary to the commission. You know, looking at just costs. Then they say we will set this board, sub-county board, another county board, 4 institutions. One of the bigger problems when we were doing the policy was multiplicity of institutions and cost. So we need institutions that have clear mandate and that connect. Community land board is essential for community land. But creating sub-county and other sub-county, smaller county boards is a waste of resources. So we need that amendment.
Can I say something? I think it is very, very key that we are discussing this at this momentous time. The first time we had the first land laws, they were hurried, they were rushed, and the parliament erred. This time, I think we cannot be subjected, because those laws were passed beyond midnight. Anybody who remembers. Even what was discussed is in the hazard, but it's not in the final law. That shows a discrepancy of the highest order. I think, regardless of the little time we are left with, all these laws are still proposals as gazetted, and they must be subjected to scrutiny of the citizens of this country, to all sectors of this country, so that we debate them and have the right thing passes. Because some of the proposals are really ridiculous. Like, because we want to put the commission to size, we are now proposing that the Public Service Commission, which is just one of the commission established by the Constitution, should be the one now to hire the National Land Commission. These ideas might look very good for whoever it may concern. One must know that all commissions are independent offices, they are equal. There's no commission which can hire the other. Yeah. So you must have those kind of... So those elements like those, which are rushed in that law, should be aired out. I think all the laws really need clear review by the citizens of this country. That is what's provided in the Constitution. That is not what you can run away from. So all those guys, including the governors, must now also be seen to state what is it that informs them to put up a statement, the one they are putting.
Finally. So on this particular issue, I just want to emphasize what Mr. Mwenda said. It's very critical, for example, in the case of community land bills, that we make sure that we have community mechanisms that will manage the land efficiently, contain the environmental degradation that is currently there, and even going forward, make sure that that land is, the tenure security for that land for the people in those communities is secure, and people within those communities are able to utilize that land. It's very unfortunate that, for example, the current pull and drag is taking away from that, which is the most critical element, and focusing on the big players like who will control what. I think the most critical thing is to ensuring that those community mechanisms work, and how can we develop them to make sure that they're sustainable.
Finally.
Thank you, Mr. Mutegi. There is already, between the time the land laws were passed, the initial ones, and now, there is a serious threat from governors who have been giving community land to other people, calling them investors, and other people without following the law. In Meru, there is a whole conservancy being created against community interests. There is already a court case. The governors and counties want to use community land for their own political mileage. That must be stopped. They met before they released that gazette note, that notice, with only National Land Commission, without any other stakeholder, to release that. And you see, that statement is just about their powers only. This country is not about powers only. We must focus on the citizen rights. Who gets title deed, who gets services, who gets to use the land effectively, who benefits from that land. That is what we ought to be focusing, and Parliament must wake up and know that they cannot do that hiding. They must come to the people.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Viewers, you have heard from the expert. Now, the question is, will the right things be done? With that remark, let's go back to the studio and hear some a cappella music.